The World FZO organization presents New World Model, the Future of Industry. Featuring Sharon Burrow from the International Trade Union Confederation, Musa Umaru from the International Labour Organization, Johnny Taylor from the Society for Human Resource Management, Roberto Suarez Santos from the International Organization of Employers.
Welcome to our virtual discussion on workforce and the future of work. The speakers we have interviewed for you have explored the challenges and opportunities facing employers and employees in companies, small and large, as the dynamics of the workforce change and shift, rebalancing employment equations across all the sectors. The questions cover the evolution of the crisis, the vectors of change observed in the industry, the way in which business models would evolve, and the impact on the global supply chain. Each speaker's full interview is also available on the event site for your viewing pleasure. Be sure to look out for our industry report on the sector, which we will publish shortly after this event. I hope you will obtain valuable intelligence from this panel, along with the other online discussions, interview, and live webinars that this event has to offer.
What has changed most radically in workforce dynamics during this crisis?
Industries producing non-essential consumer goods where demand has been plummeted, such as the ready-made garment sector, and the industries producing durable goods, such as the automobile industry, because such investments are no longer in reach for many families and others who fear the future and prefer to hold on their savings.
So where there was inequality and a fear about security of jobs and wages, you now have massive unemployment. So that shifted dramatically for the workforce. And you also have a growing authoritarianism in government, which means attacks on rights are actually increasing.
The thing, though, that stands out most is, at the end of the day, is the uncertainty around people's health, as well as their uncertainty around their financial health. We oftentimes describe it here as life and your livelihood.
Productivity. I'm not paying you just to be in the office. I'm not just having an engagement with you worker and with employer to work X number of hours. I want objectives, I want your autonomy, I want your motivation. That's changing. We are not realizing it. How deep is this change coming?
Which sectors have been the most affected?
I would say hospitality generally is, and travel and tourism related businesses are the ones that are most negatively impacted. But the wake effect of that, and we don't think about this, we think traditionally about workers. And when you think about the combined workforce, the people who are part of the gig economy, they're not in formal jobs, but they are really impacted.
In the white collar sector, then of course remote work has become much more prevalent, and that brings with it a whole set of other challenges around rights and standards and health and safety. But the supply chains and therefore even services have been massively disrupted.
Within the traditional sectors that we always mention, it's very often that we forget that 60% of the occupied population has no decent jobs, has not labor conditions as such, because they are in the informal sector. They don't have the chance even to implement health and safety measures established by their governments.
Companies operating in the informal economy are even more likely to be wiped out during the pandemic because governments are often reluctant to help them.
In what region will the impact be most severe in the short term?
As the economic crisis spreads from continued depressed economic growth and suppressed demand for goods and services, regions everywhere risks to be severely affected.
Those parts of the world where those human beings are beset with poor financial resources, which naturally leads into poor access to health and education, those areas are really feeling the impact, not only in the short run, but especially in the short run. But over time, we're going to see that those regions around the world are going to be negatively impacted, potentially for generations.
Then if you look at recovery and the potential for recovery and building resilience, then it's the countries that are not as wealthy that will have a long-term impact if there's no global solidarity, if the global corporations and supply chains fail to get this right.
Those countries that really understand that you cannot have an environment which is very restrictive for a business model which is sustainable but is also friendly will be having strong challenges. I mean, we'll need that as a driver for the future.
What is the greatest challenge for employers to overcome in the short term?
Health and safety is the key element to assure continuity in business, okay? And it's not just social distancing, using masks, it's reassuring workers that they have a safe place. That's a key challenge in the short term.
And so there's an opportunity here, a unique opportunity to upskill employees so that when we come out of the pandemic, the post-pandemic world, that we will have the human resources necessary to compete in what will likely be a global recession. And therefore, the investment in people, having the best people on board with the latest skills is going to be even more critical than pre-pandemic.
This downward spiral needs to be stopped by appropriate measures for enterprises and workers through business continuity support and the workers' income protection. This is where tripartite social dialogue and strong social protections became vitally important to avoid a continuous downward spiral.
We are very supportive of global trade. We need to manage the reshoring with technology, but we also want to see jobs in those supply chains because otherwise economies will collapse and the poorer countries will be left, without hope. But we cannot have a future that's based on denial of rights and therefore exploitation.
How should companies adapt to face this challenge?
Our 2019 Centennial Declaration on the Future of Work already highlighted the essential role of skills development to prepare workers for the future of work, characterized by robotics and artificial intelligence, and also digital operations of enterprises. So COVID-19 has simply accelerated these trends, making skills development even more critical.
Redefine. So first one has to visit. What is the culture of my organization? Why do we exist? And I'm talking bigger than the mission and the vision and the purpose statements, but at its core, why do we exist? And then how do we want to experience this existence is the second question. And that's what culture is all about.
At the end of the day, we are talking about mentality and we are talking about attitudes. So the most challenging change for companies and workers right now is how I integrate a new health and safety culture, which will remain, which will not just disappear when the pandemic will disappear.
For global corporations, there are commitments from the European Union to actually mandate due diligence. That's the UN Business and Human Rights Principles. Companies taking responsibility for risk assessment, not just for financial risk, but for human rights risk and environmental risk.
What new employment models are likely to emerge in the medium to long term?
we're moving slowly toward, away from the traditional employee for life model. And so the mix now is increasingly going to be, as employers think about it, almost just-in-time employment. So I'm not going to have 500 employees at one time. I'll have 200 base, and then who are just my steadies. And then as I need them, I'll draw down on those resources.
If you look to how you build a secure future with both jobs, one that's climate proof, that actually has a net zero ambition, that is rights-based, and that indeed has the skills you need, then you need to look at how you map the need for industry policy to drive a transformation.
It is not enough to return to the status quo before the pandemic struck. As you know also, in 2019, the ILO Declaration for the Future of Work sets out a roadmap of action to meet the challenges of globalization, technological innovation, demographic shifts, and the climate change.
Those realities are creating important challenges in terms of labor regulations that we have, in terms of fair competition, in terms of skills needed. But I want to insist on one point that is very often forgotten. These new realities are bringing incredible opportunities for people who did not have any possibility of income before.
What new opportunities will this create for employers and employees?
Perhaps this is one of these challenges of the new reality of the world, not just the work, is that we have global phenomena and we don't have global solutions. But there are important opportunities for business, and there are also important opportunities for employers to work with digital tools, improving the productivity and the satisfaction of your own employees.
Businesses have to say, well, what's the plan? And where do I need to map a future? And how do I take responsibility for workers and their communities in that future? And that's why, economic and social governance, ESG, has to become the framework, but in much more robust terms.
Through social dialogue, governments, workers, and employers' organizations can forge a strong consensus for a sustainable recovery that promotes decent work, resilient enterprises and workplaces, and environmental sustainability.
The real change that we're seeing, the transformation, is a focus on cultural alignment, but from both sides. It's not that the employer is just changing the way it does it. The employee, if you truly understand your value, can say, oh, and I don't want to work there either. I can take who I am and all of my skills to another employer, and that employer is more culturally aligned with who I am. That is going to be the biggest transformation we see over the medium to long term out of this pandemic.
How will these changes transform the global value chain?
A key lesson of the pandemic has been that efficiency, particularly hyper-efficiency and just-in-time model, may need to be tempered with strong focus on resilience in the face of demand or supply shocks, as well as a stronger focus on sustainability to combat climate change.
Employees are going to have to realize that in this highly super competitive world where we're going into an economic recession globally, and that employers will look around the globe to solve their workforce needs now, skilling, upskilling is now my personal responsibility. It's not just my employer's responsibility, because the reality is the employer says, if you can't do the job that I need you to do, that person in Bangalore can.
We firmly believe that in the middle and long term, this trend of workforce global and global talent competition is there. We have to avoid the situation in which we come back to a protectionism, nationalism perspective, just preserving the jobs here in this exact place instead of No, that's the wrong way.
We simply say we're headed to a world that has to be employment proofed and it has to be climate proof. And so a net zero by 2050, full employment, inclusive economies, whatever words you want to put on them, require indeed both responsibility, that means transparency, and indeed the base of resilience you can build against future global shock.
For more insights from each of our speakers, please take a look at our exclusive individual in-depth interviews available on our website.